Now, the cover of the Spanish newspaper Mundo Deportivo saying cumbre for Griezmann, a meeting for Griezmann. It's a meeting that seems to have Barcelona in a lot of hot water. Let's bring in Raf Honigstein on this. Barcelona casting beady eyes towards Antoine Griezmann. Atletico Madrid complaining to FIFA that Barca have made an improper approach. What's the story, Raf?
Well, the story is that Guillermo Amor, Barcelona official, has been a little bit indiscreet, saying, yes, there might have been an approach and we might have an understanding. This is the stuff that Barcelona usually do, the sort of work. So that went down very badly with Atletico. Usually have a pretty good relationship with Barcelona. And as you said, they've reported them to FIFA. Now, these things usually don't happen. They don't happen because all clubs are in the same glass house. They all tap each other's players up, and no one usually complains. The transfer bans that we usually see only happen when something really improper has happened, when it comes to signing minors or when somebody has done a deal with a player that's still under contract. But even then, it's down to the complaining club to produce the evidence. And I think that's where Barcelona might just be on the safe side, because it'll be down to Atletico to say where was this improper conduct? Where was the improper contact? What has actually happened? And I think Barcelona might just get away with it. But being reported in the first place is very bad, because it only happens in very extreme circumstances.
Well, if they do get away with it, Raf, how close are we to seeing Antoine Griezmann in a Barcelona shirt, perhaps?
Well, I think we're pretty close. I think Griezmann made no secret about the fact that he really wanted to leave in the summer. I think the deal with Man United was very advanced, and of course then the transfer ban for Atletico over signing a minor destroyed that plan and made him stay out of loyalty. But I think both Atletico and he believe now that it's time to move on. We're not talking about January, we're talking about next summer. And Barcelona, I think, were always the most likely and in a way most fitting team from, especially with a Neymar-shaped hole to fill up front. So I think this is going to happen.
Manchester City squeezed through against Leicester. We saw Arsenal win narrowly against West Ham. But why? Let's start with this. Why, let me ask, do teams like Leicester and West Ham field second-string squads in a competition they could win? They could win this. This could be silverware for them.
Leicester not so much so, because they're not going to be in a relegation battle this year. They're going to be probably mid-table and just above. So a little surprising from them, because he would have known, Claude Puel, that he was going to ring the changes, Pep Guardiola, for City, because they're fighting in all fronts. They've got a deep squad. They're on this great run. And so he was always going to make changes, still to some good players, some good youngsters and some experienced players getting some game time. So that, from that perspective, strange from Leicester. I'm not so surprised with Xhaka's old club West Ham doing it, because they are in a relegation battle, and that's the reason that they did it.
But still, yes, as much as they make changes, David Moyes gets an opportunity to see some players in his squad that, you know, he may not get the opportunity to on the weekends in league games. But sometimes when you're in a relegation battle, a decent cup run can boost confidence. You know, if you beat Manchester City, even if it's a second-string Manchester City, I think it gives players a lift.
Speaking with the voice of experience?
Speaking with the voice of experience.
Relegation battles eased by cup runs?
Yes, we've had a couple of those. On the one hand, I see the reason for West Ham putting out a stronger squad, against Arsenal, against a weakened Arsenal, as I mentioned, but they chose not to. I'm a little bit torn on it.
You can understand the big boys doing it, so they always have, or certainly for the last decade or two in this competition.
You know, at the end of the day, the owners and the boards of all these clubs, and I'm talking about your Leicester Cities and your Southamptons, don't care about the Carabao Cup. If anybody should know that, it's Claude Puel. He lost his job at Southampton, having won this tournament. And again, if I'm David Moyes...
No, they got to the final.
I beg your pardon.
They got to the final.
They played well.
And if I'm David Moyes, I don't give a monkeys about the League Cup.
No.
The only job I've got to do is get points in the Premier League. So I don't care about the Carabao Cup.
Even when it offers momentum, like Xhaka has said, he's done well since he's taken over. Couldn't they have kept that going?
That's the thing for me, yes. You're playing well, you want to keep your team playing well. every win kind of counts and boosts confidence. So for me, it made sense to put out at least a stronger team than we saw today.
Henrik Mkhitaryan may get a game in the famed Carabao Cup, but other than that, seems to be on the outs for Jose Mourinho. What next for Mkhitaryan?
I think it's actually called the Carabao Cup, but
Yes.
who am I to correct you? I think there is a small chance he might actually start again. He's been frozen out completely for the last couple of months. We've been there before, of course, last season. Remember, the start for him was terrible. And then when he came back, played pretty well. And Jose Mourinho said, you see, I just had to handle him and he needed to learn. But it increasingly looks as if he's a little bit lost in the way that United play. They play with a very kind of fast midfield. They don't really dwell on the ball. They go and try and hit either the players either side of Lukaku or Lukaku straight away. And Mkhitaryan playing deep in that role next to or behind Pogba, he can't really get enough of the ball to play his game. And I think he's been demoralised. His confidence is blown. And Mourinho doesn't look as if he's actually that interested in restoring that confidence, opting to perhaps cut his losses and move him on. That's certainly the vibe that you're getting, that there isn't really that patience to sit and work with him to make this happen, because I think his mind is already on who's going to come in next year, who's going to improve us a lot better.
And you mentioned that lack of patience, Raf. Any chance that Mkhitaryan could thus become the next De Bruyne or Salah, someone who there wasn't any patience for earlier on in their career?
Yeah, I think it's very possible, because we have seen already what Mkhitaryan can do. We saw it at Shakhtar, we certainly saw it at Dortmund under Thomas Tuchel, where he was absolutely outstanding, had interest from all over Europe. I think if you were to put him on the market in January, there'd be a lot of interest for him, especially for Italy, where his stock is really, really high still. Of course, his agent is Mino Raiola, that helps. So it might come back to haunt him. Maybe not as much as Kevin De Bruyne and Mo Salah and Lukaku, of course, who had to come back to a Mourinho club for a lot of money. But it is a player that, for whatever reason, doesn't work with Mourinho, but it doesn't mean he's not going to work somewhere else pretty well.
No waiting required to see who MLS teams are going to be playing in the CONCACAF Champions League. The round of 16 matchups set for February. Just want to get your thoughts, Jeff, generally. An MLS team, this remains the holy grail, doesn't it? MLS team has yet to win the CONCACAF Champions League. The calendar has shifted a bit this year. Does this give them the chance to do it? Thinking particularly of the recently crowned champions Toronto, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think Toronto has as good a shot as probably any MLS team has had. You know, when you think about the depth of their roster, you know, the talent level that you know, Tim Bezbatchenko and Greg Vanney have been able to accumulate, but their path, you know, to get to the final is going to be really challenging. You know, if they get past the Colorado Rapids, you know, in the round of 16, which I expect them to do, you know, then they're probably looking at playing Tigres, who are the reigning champions, in the next round, and then perhaps Club America after that. So the path to the final is going to be really difficult for Toronto. You know, granted, I think they're by far the best team, you know, in MLS at the moment, but you know, it's definitely going to be difficult, and certainly, you know, just, you know, until someone can break through, I mean, that question is always going to be raised.
Jeff, really interesting development. If you drawn up a list of expansion city candidates 12 months ago, Nashville were probably near the bottom of that list, I'd warrant. So what has changed in the intervening year?
Well, what's happened is that Nashville has put together a very compelling bid. You know, if you listen to MLS long enough on these expansion issues, they always talk about the market, the ownership group, and the stadium plan. And Nashville's ownership group is really impressive. You know, it's backed by two billionaires with the B. And, you know, first you've got John Ingram, who's the lead investor. He has local ties, and MLS loves that. And then you've also got the Wilf family from the NFL's Minnesota Vikings, who have also come on board. And so that's given this bid a lot of financial muscle. And, you know, I think for MLS that was really compelling. What was also compelling was the stadium plan. You know, they found a site on the Fairgrounds, Nashville. The city kicked in $225 million in financing for the $275 million project. Again, MLS loves when the local community steps up and provides financing for these kinds of things. Now, the market is a little bit unproven. You know, You know, there have been some one-off events like the Gold Cup, and then, you know, and then some friendlies featuring foreign clubs that have drawn really well. Obviously, that doesn't quite compete with what, say, Cincinnati and Sacramento have done, but it's a growing city. It fits a part of the national footprint that MLS has been trying to capture for a while now. So I think when you add the location, the ownership group, and the stadium plan, you've got a bid that I think was probably the most complete out of the 4 finalists.
It was supposed to be a time of year where MLS announced 2 expansion cities. There's only going to be 1 announcement. What's the situation with the second, and where would you rank Cincinnati, Detroit, and Sacramento right now?
Well, there will be a second team announced. Exactly when that's going to happen, whether that happens before the Christmas holiday or whether MLS waits until after, that remains to be seen. But in terms of ranking, I would say Detroit is kind of a distant, 4th out of these group of 4. They have a very powerful ownership group, Tom Gores and Dan Gilbert. But their solution for a stadium has not exactly sat well with MLS. They're opting for Ford Field, and MLS is very much all about, soccer-centric stadiums, if you will. So that leaves Sacramento and Cincinnati, and at this point, I would put Cincinnati just a hair ahead of Sacramento. Now, Sacramento was the front runner for quite a while, but some questions have emerged about their ownership group, the extent to which they're willing to fund everything. And also for Sacramento, over time, the costs have gone up. When they started this journey in 2014, the expansion fee was $70 million. The cost of the stadium was about $180 million, and those costs have definitely gone up. The expansion fee is almost doubled, or actually more than doubled, and the stadium cost has gone up to about, from what I'm told, $250 million. So, those issues have kind of tripped Sacramento up a little bit. There are some questions still about Cincinnati's stadium plan. They don't quite have it buttoned down. They're going ahead with the Oakley site in Cincinnati, but there's been talk that they could pivot away from that if that was necessary. So, for both Sacramento and Cincinnati, really compelling bids, but there's still some things that need to be taken care of. But at this point, I would put Cincinnati just ahead of Sacramento.
They'll be waiting with bated breath, Jeff, for that announcement.